Fellas, every single UFC weight class right now has at least one fighter who is the greatest of all time in that division. The one fighter who stands out for being the best there ever was in that specific division. So I'm going to be ranking every single UFC weight class by how easy it is to become the greatest of all time in that division. Now that can be, based on how easy it is to compete with the current GOAT. Can they actually compete with the current greatest of that division? Or, how competitive is that division? How many defenses are they going to get? So all the current champions, or not even just the champions, just how easy is it to become the greatest of all time in every division. Starting off in last place, the current division which I believe is the easiest to become the greatest of all time in is heavyweight. The reason is, well, the current greatest of all time in heavyweight is Stipe, in my opinion. You've got 4 title defenses to beat from Stipe, and it's just, I feel like with heavyweight, it's not hard to get to the top. If you put any effort in heavyweight compared to other divisions, it's just not hard. You can put maximum effort in, for example, in the lightweight division, you might not even crack top 10. As long as you put a little bit of effort in the heavyweight division, you're not just a middleweight with no discipline. It's pretty easy to get in the top 10 at heavyweight compared to other divisions. I think you just need to get a few title defenses, beat a few of the top fighters, and you'll be the greatest of all time. I believe by the end of his career, and people are going to say I'm glazing or whatever, but I believe by the end of his career, Tom Aspinall has what it takes to become the greatest heavyweight of all time. I think you just need around 4 or 5 title defenses, beat some top level fighters, make sure you're not just fighting the fat heavyweights, make sure you're getting a couple big wins in there, don't go on a horrific losing streak, and I think that's how you become the greatest of all time in the heavyweight division. Getting into the top 10 isn't hard at all compared to other divisions because it's just fat middleweights outside the top 10. You don't even have to have more than 5 defenses in this division compared to other ones. Stipe is a great fighter, but I don't think he's irreplaceable. I think he's probably one of the most replaceable GOATs on this list. So in last place, easiest division to become the greatest of all time in, I'm going with the heavyweight division. Next place, we've got the Bantamweight division. Now, the one thing that stops it from being first is the fact that it's such a competitive division. In fact, I think the Bantamweight division is the most competitive in the UFC. It's full of killers, and it's not just easy to become a ranked Bantamweight. There's so many killers in the division, but the greatest of all time in this division, in Dominic Cruz, only has 3 title defenses. In fact, Aljamain Sterling was close to becoming the greatest of all time in this division. The guy that was known for getting an Oscar-worthy performance, for his title defense, getting a controversial win against Yan in the rematch, beating an injured TJ Dillashaw and then a long layoff Henry Cejudo. That guy, if he'd have beaten O'Malley, there would have been so many people saying that he was the greatest bantamweight of all time. I just think if a good bantamweight comes along, I think Merab's got what it takes, and I think maybe even a Nurmagomedov has what it takes. But I think you just need at least 4 title defenses in this division, and they have to be good defenses. Like I said, they can't really be against injured fighters or controversial fights. I'm talking about solid wins over top level opponents, and because the fighters in this division are so good, I think it only takes 3 or 4 title defenses to become the greatest of all time in this division. Again, you can't just go on this massive long losing streak. It's not just the title picture, it's your career as a whole in this division. So I think a guy like Merab, or maybe an Umar Nurmagomedov, I don't think O'Malley's going to beat Merab, so I'm not going to say his name, but bantamweight, I'm going to say, as competitive as it is, it's got the weakest GOAT compared to every other division. So I'm going to say bantamweight's the second easiest, despite it being such a difficult division. And third place, similar to bantamweight, I've gone with lightweight. Now, the thing about lightweight is, again, it's such a competitive division. Look at the fighters you've got at the top. I'm not going to talk about the champion, but you've got Oliveira, you've got Gaethje, you've got Saruki, and you've got a bunch of killers at the top. Now, the reason I think it's not too hard to become the greatest of all time is because, first of all, I think Islam's really close to doing it. You've got Khabib and Nurmagomedov. Now, people are going to say that the people that say Khabib's the greatest of all time, none of them talk about him and his defenses. They talk about the fact that he was, unbeatable. They talk about the fact that he never bled. No one talks about his defenses when people are bringing up him being the greatest of all time. He's got 3 defenses. How can you have 3 defenses and be classed the greatest of all time? I'm not saying it's easy to do in the lightweight division, but if you just get more than 3 defenses, if you get 4 or 5 defenses in this division, which I think Islam Makhachev can easily do, I don't think there's a single person in this division that's beaten Islam Makhachev. I think, you not easily, but I think you could become the greatest of all time in this division. Charles Oliveira would have probably become the greatest lightweight of all time had he not lost to Islam Makhachev, and I know it's a big if, but if Islam Makhachev didn't exist and Oliveira racked up maybe 2-3 more defenses, he'd have been the greatest of all time. You just need one dominant champion. You don't need to be getting 10s and 11 defenses like a couple of the other divisions. You just need about 5 defenses. You have to have a pretty flawless career in this difficult difficult division, and that's all it takes to become the greatest of all time. So as competitive as it is, lightweight, I'm going to say that that's the third easiest. Now we're on to featherweight. Now featherweight, I don't think it's easy to become the greatest of all time in this division, because like I said with bantamweight and lightweight, it's full of killers, but you're competing with Jose Aldo, in my opinion. Some people would say Volk, but I'd say you're competing with Jose Aldo, who's had 7 title defenses in the UFC. I'm not going to count WEC. I'm counting just pure UFC. You're competing with Aldo with 7 defenses. It's so hard to get 7 defenses in the featherweight division. Look at the roster. I know I've said that in my past two, my past 2 explanations of lightweight and bantamweight, but look at the roster. But one thing I will say about featherweight is it hasn't got a massive long list of lineage at the top. In fact, I've realised that in featherweight, champions do tend to hold on the belt for a long time. We just had Volkanovski have his massive reign. We've had Aldo have his massive reign. The only other champions were Conor McGregor and Max Holloway, now obviously Ilia Topuria. So because the champions do tend to hold on for the belt for a long time, I think that definitely pushes a lot of fighters in the greatest of all time. In fact, the 4 fighters outside of Topuria that actually had the belt, they're all in a discussion for who's the greatest of all time. Obviously, most people would say Aldo and Volk, but there's still people out there that would push McGregor for being the greatest featherweight of all time just because of him in his prime. So I'm going to say that featherweight, as much killers are in this division, and you need to get a large chunk of defenses. I think the champions holding onto the belt for a long time definitely helps. So I'm going to go with featherweight. Now, middleweight. The reason I've put middleweight this high on the list is I understand that the middleweight might not have been the most competitive division in the past few years. I understand the fighters at the top of middleweight have been guys like Paulo Costa and Marvin Vettori and Jared Cannonier, and just overall, I wouldn't call middleweight a division that's stacked with killers like I have in the other divisions. But the one reason middleweight is so high is because it's practically impossible to overtake Anderson Silva. Silva's got 10 defenses in his middleweight UFC career. I don't think any middleweight's going to come along and beat that. Adesanya wasn't too far from beating it. Adesanya's definitely a close second to Anderson Silva, but it's definitely Silva right now in the #1 spot on middleweight. And unless a fighter, like I said, as good as Adesanya comes along and dominates the division for a long time, I just don't think anyone in the near future is going to compete with Adesanya. Never mind Anderson Silva. And when I say compete with Adesanya, I mean legacy-wise, not, against Adesanya. I'm talking like compete with Adesanya's legacy. Never mind Anderson Silva. So, because the middleweight division, the fighters in this don't really tend to be the highest level. They don't really tend to be killers. I'm going to say that the middleweight division is definitely one of the tougher divisions to win a belt, or not to win a belt, but to be the greatest of all time in, just because you're competing with Anderson Silva. So, I'm going to go with middleweight. Next up, I've gone with the welterweight division. Yeah, it's really hard to become the greatest of all time in the welterweight division. Usman wasn't too far from doing it, but he still had a long way to go. If Leon Edwards wants to become the greatest of all time in the welterweight division, he's competing with GSP. Some people would call GSP the greatest of all time, period, right? But one thing I will say, we can't really count in the fact that GSP beat Bisping. I know that definitely adds to the list of why he could be the greatest of all time. But we're purely just talking about the welterweight division, not him beating Bisping at middleweight. So just purely in the welterweight division, GSP was able to get 9 title defenses. Leon's going to have to, in my opinion, get another 6 defenses against top level opponents. He's had his 2 defenses against Usman and Colby. I think he's still got about 6 to go. He needs to get at least 8 or 9 defenses. Similar, just about near enough matching GSP in defenses, and you have to be against top level opponents. I want to see him defending his belt against guys like Shavkat, killers like Shavkat, guys like Ian Gary, Bilal Muhammad, just killers in this division is what I want to be seeing Leon defend against. And I think he has potential. I'm not saying he is, but he has potential. If he goes on this massive, streak in the welterweight division, I don't think he's going to be too far from overtaking GSP, but that's a big if. I don't think Leon's going to get 6 defenses. I don't even think he's going to get 3 more. So, yeah, insanely hard to get to become the greatest of all time in this division because you're competing with GSP. So, I'm going to say that welterweight is definitely top 3 hardest divisions to become the greatest of all time in. Second place, flyweight, because you're competing with Demetrius Johnson. It's practically impossible to become the greatest flyweight of all time because Demetrius Johnson, in my opinion, is the most skilled fighter of all time. I don't think there's a man that has walked this planet in the UFC universe or in the MMA as a whole who's been more skilled than Demetrius Johnson. one of the most well-rounded fighter of all time, the most skilled fighter of all time. He's got 11 title defenses in the UFC. No flyweight is getting more than 10 defense. Well, no flyweight, in my opinion, is getting more than 6. I think Pantoja is going to rule the division for a long time. I think he has potential to get around 5 or 6 defenses before he gets knocked off. But 11 defenses, overtaking Demetrius Johnson, who had a pretty much flawless career in the flyweight division, and is still winning to this day. I know that's not in the UFC, so I'm not going to count it. But he's had a pretty much flawless division, flawless career. Yeah, in my opinion, Demetrius Johnson's always going to be the flyweight god. He's the most skilled fighter ever. If Pantoja wants to even get past Demetrius Johnson, he's going to have to get another like 10 defenses to overtake Demetrius Johnson, which, let's be honest, he's not going to do. So yeah, for the flyweight division, unless some absolute killer that's been made in a lab comes along, I don't think anyone's overtaking Demetrius Johnson in the flyweight division. Even though Pantoja's got potential, I think he has potential to retire as maybe the 3rd or the 2nd greatest, but definitely not overtaking Demetrius Johnson. So I'm going to say flyweight is 2nd, and then the number 1 division that I think it is the hardest division to become the greatest of all time in, I've gone with the light heavyweight division. Now, to be honest, we've looked to the light heavyweight title lineage recently, and most champions can't even get 1 defense. Most of the champions recently in the past few years at light heavyweight, they've won the belt. It's kind of like hot potato. They win in the belt, and then someone else will win, and then someone else will win, and then someone else will win. So the fact that these light heavyweights can't even manage to get 1 title defense is concerning. Never mind get up to the 13 title defenses that John Jones got. John Jones was considered the GOAT because of his light heavyweight career, even before he went out and beat Cyril Gane in the heavyweight division. No one's overtaking John Jones as being the greatest of all time in the light heavyweight division. No one's doing it. There's no way anyone, not a chance, any of these light heavyweights are getting near to 13 title defenses. I'd actually make a bet that in the next 10 years, there isn't going to be a single light heavyweight that comes along and gets more than 6 title defenses. Never mind 13. Never mind be undefeated in the light heavyweight division like John Jones was. Never mind be the youngest champion in that division. Never mind dominate the champions of pretty much 3 different eras in the light heavyweight division. No one's going to overtake John Jones for being the light heavyweight greatest of all time. And for that reason, light heavyweight is the most difficult division to become the greatest of all time in. But yeah, that's me ranking every single UFC division by how hard it is and how easy it is to become the greatest of all time. Let me know if you'd agree. I think most of these, again, but it's kind of hard that some of the competitive divisions are so low down, but just because in the competitive divisions the champions have only had a handful of defenses, I don't think it'd be too difficult if they, a new champion that's dominant comes along, gets those defenses. But yeah, that's my personal list. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.